I am a person in long-term recovery. I haven't had a drink or a drug or a mind-altering substance since April the 5th, 2015. Just saying it out loud is still, especially when I add a little over 7 years, still hard for me to believe sometimes. Today, I have purpose. Recovery has allowed me to sort of understand what's important to me. And right now, that's being a good father, it's being a good husband, it's being a good friend. I'd like to say that I had purpose before this, but this is a different kind of purpose today.
Substance use disorder touches all our lives, and often we feel hopeless or frustrated in our pursuit to understand how and why it happens.
Welcome to APC Recovery Cafe, where we discuss the topics and trends around substance use, provide education and resources, offer recovery support, and also discuss prevention tactics, all through the stories of the people who have been there.
We invite you to grab your favorite coffee or tea and join us for a variety of guests that will bring understanding, information, connection, and hope.
Together, we can break the stigma and pave a brighter future for each other.
Hey guys, welcome back into this episode of APC Recovery Cafe. I'm Art Wimberly, a person grateful to be in long-term recovery and one of your co-hosts. And with me today in the studio is Edward Taylor of APC. Edward, how are you doing?
Good. Yeah, I'm Edward Taylor, Director of Prevention Initiatives at the Addiction Prevention Coalition. Person in long-term recovery, more grateful than Art.
Probably true.
And then we have John Bayles with us today, Program Director at the Crisis Center. Did I get it right?
Yes, you got it right. I'm the Program Director at the Recovery Resource Center. We're a program of the Crisis Center. They have a lot of different programs, so we're one of them. We're lucky to be a part of it.
Excellent. And what you got to drink there?
I have an iced mocha. It's really good, and it's coming from Seeds.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Seeds.
Yep.
I'm a West Homewood guy, so they're great.
What we'll do, I guess, is, and Art will be chiming in as well, but I think we'll just kind of start with allowing you to tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll kind of get into your job and what you do and probably how your life experiences led you to that point.
Okay, sure. So I am a person in long-term recovery. For me, what that means is I haven't had a drink or a drug or a mind-altering substance since April the 5th, 2015. So a little over 7 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just saying it out loud is still, especially when I add a little over 7 years, still hard for me to believe sometimes.
I remember when I was just hoping for 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's a big deal.
Or a week or 24 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, that 24 hours at a time, one day at a time, that's real,
Yeah.
especially early on. But it also means that today I have purpose. Recovery has allowed me to sort of understand what's important to me. And right now that's being a good father, it's being a good husband, it's being a good friend, a good coworker. It's making sure that I'm out there trying to help people avoid the same sort of suffering and struggle. I'd like to say that I had purpose before this, but this is a different kind of purpose today. So
I appreciate you mentioning purpose because I've been in one of those seasons of recovery where things are a little you just don't feel plugged in as much. You just feel like you're just kind of there. And I was talking to my sponsor on Sunday and he asked me, he's like, well, what's your purpose? And I was like, I didn't understand what he meant at first. I was like, you mean like professionally or like, he's like, no, like what gets you out of your bed every morning? And I was like, and then he went on to tell me his, but I identified with it. And it was just like, I know for sure I just want to help people. I know for sure that like all the stuff that I've been through puts me in a very unique position where every day I have an opportunity to like help somebody like nobody else can.
So part of my story includes a recovery residence. Some people call it sober living. Back in the day, people used to call it a halfway house. But when I completed treatment, I went to this recovery residence, and they used to have a big community meeting on Sundays. And I remember it was the first Sunday I was there, and the guy who was standing up, he was kind of giving a lecture, and he was talking to the entire group of guys, and he said, "Is anyone sitting out there wondering what your purpose is?" And that was me. At that time, shortly before that time, I had been living in New York. I had this life, and it seemed like almost overnight I was back in Birmingham. I was at the sober living program in Bessemer. And it was almost like I woke up and I was like, what is going on? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? And he said, well, I'm here to tell you your purpose, and that's to stay sober and help another addict or alcoholic. And I held on to that for some reason. I held on to it, and I'll never forget it. And early on, and that is still, I guess, my primary purpose, but what recovery has given me is all of these other reasons. Like I said, like my son, Graham, my wife, Celeste, the job I have today, the impact I know I can make. But at the end of the day, I know if I don't remember that primary purpose, then I definitely wasn't marriage material. I definitely wasn't. I definitely wasn't ready to be a father.
Well, that sounds
direct
familiar.
material.
No. So I'm pretty sure that if I wasn't sober today, like I'd probably wouldn't be where I'm at. So,
So, John, part of your story I know deals with heroin, but you have shared that the bigger part of it really was other opiates or opioids, maybe prescription pills, that type of thing.
sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
I remember I was maybe 15 or 16, and I went over to a friend's house, and we walked into his kitchen, and he opened up the cabinet, and he pulled down a bottle of pills, and he said, "Hey, if we take these, we'll get high." And they were these little white pills with green specks, and they were Lortab 7.5s. And we did take them, and we did get high. But it wasn't like I immediately became addicted to opioids.
Yeah.
That's not my story.
None of us, as far as I know, are medical experts, but doesn't what you're describing point to what we're learning more and more about these days in terms of genetic makeup for people and how different substances will affect different people? It's not to put it out as an excuse that I had to get addicted. That's not what we're talking about. But I think we're getting smarter as we get more scientific and medical information about just how easily some people can get addicted to certain substances and how hard it is for them to get sober. Does that make sense?
It does make sense to me, and I definitely am not a medical expert. But in the science behind addiction, what I always say is it's there. And there's a lot of it, and there's a lot of really smart people who have spent a long time looking into this. And I just know that I'm different, and I feel like there's a really good chance that my son could be different as well. And so today, I probably spend too much time right now thinking about how I'm going to have that conversation with him. He's only 2. So I know I have a little bit of time, but I do kind of obsess about that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm just curious, what was like, because you mentioned it started with alcohol. Is that kind of like the substance? Because like for me, when I took opiates, you mentioned you weren't addicted right away. I was and I wasn't. And what I mean is when I first did opiates, immediately it was, like you said, but it seems more intense for me, or like I was just... It felt like I finally found the missing piece, and obviously feeling the best I'd ever felt, but I didn't immediately start stealing from my grandparents and pawning stuff and using the needle. So like in that sense, like the next day I just woke up and I was like, wow, that was incredible, but time to go to school. You know what I mean? Like, what was the substance, if there was one for you, where you consumed it and you were like, oh, this is it?
So that's a good question, and I get what you're saying. The first time I ever drank alcohol, I was with a group of friends. They were actually, it was some guy. I was with my church basketball team, basically, and one of them had a mom, and she was going to be the cool mom, and she was going to let us drink at the house as long as we did.
You got to stay there.
Yeah, you got to stay under the roof. So
harm reduction.
We drank. Yeah, we drank a lot of wine coolers, Bartles and James. I'm probably aging myself. A lot of people probably don't remember that.
Unfortunately,
Art,
I do.
Yeah, Art. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was Bartles and James, and then Seagram's. Yeah, it was. Anyway, so I remember when we ran out, I wanted more, and it seemed like the other 4 guys that I was with, they were content.
Yeah.
But I remember wanting more, and I remember wanting to walk down to the convenience store to try and get more. I don't know what's going on with those 4 guys today, but I feel pretty good saying that none of them have the story that I have. So I believe that I was different, and I believe it affected me different. I guess after that, for real, when I was in high school, it was marijuana. I was that person who sort of thought, one day I remember telling my teachers, who used to get on to me for showing up to school with bloodshot eyes, and I would tell them, one day it's going to be legal. You'll see, just wait. Like, there's nothing wrong one day. And the funny thing is, the ironic thing is, it's probably going to be legal very soon. It is already in a lot of states, but, and I know for a fact today that I cannot smoke it.
Yeah.
But for me, it wasn't necessarily one substance. What I always say is, I became addicted to putting something in my body to change the way I felt. I became addicted to self-medicating. Consequences came pretty early for me. I was 16 the first time I got arrested, and I remember being handcuffed. It was a Friday night, handcuffed up against the side of my car, and my friends were driving by on the main road, and for a split second, I felt some shame. I was embarrassed. But Monday, when I went back to school, everyone was talking about me. It was like I had a badge of honor. All of a sudden, I had a story, I had an identity, and I remember that. And, you know, that sort of thinking.
Replaced the shame pretty quickly.
Yeah. And so then if I put something in my body, people are going to like me. If I do crazy things, if I cause a scene, if I make people laugh, if I make people cry.
That sounds very
that sort of
familiar
carried
to
on
me.
for carried on.
A lot of that
20
idea
years.
about identity or image. Yeah. So, gosh, what was we could spend a lot of time kind of parsing out the rest of the details of the story, but I want to go back to something you said earlier about after getting sober and then hearing that man speak at the meeting about purpose. And then, so we're talking about, you know, you've got roughly 7 years of sobriety, it sounds like, right?
Yep.
And then along the way, you have found more specific purpose that has led you to where you are today, leading the Recovery Resource Center. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So tell us about, as part of the Crisis Center, folks in Birmingham, a lot of folks really do know Crisis Center, part of the United Way. It's a big organization. As you said, runs a lot of programs.
Yeah.
You can describe some of us to us. And then we'd like you to talk a little bit about the specificity of Recovery Resource Center, because what a resource for the state of Alabama.
Yeah, thanks, Art. I'm really proud of the work we're doing over at the RRC right now, and to be a part of the Crisis Center. The Crisis Center's been around for 50 years in Birmingham, and they sort of started out primarily suicide prevention and intervention. They had a 24/7 call line. It started with a group of dedicated volunteers who talked to the mayor of Birmingham and into giving them a little office and a phone down in basement of City Hall. And
Humble beginnings.
Yeah, and that has grown to, they have numerous programs. They work with survivors of sexual assault. They have a rape response program and a SANE program, which is sexual assault nurse examiner. They have programs for teens. They have a U-Talk program, which is really cool. It just allows teens to text. They have a program for seniors where they can a senior who's at home alone can connect with the program, and someone will call them a couple times a week and just talk to them on the phone.
Wow, what an expansion.
Yeah. And so in 2017, overdose numbers were just skyrocketing in Jefferson County. They were skyrocketing all over the country, really. And Dr. Mark Wilson, our strongest advocate, a personal hero of mine, Dr. Mark Wilson sort of looked at the numbers and said, we need to do something. And he got together with some other crucial people, some other people that worked in treatment already, were working in recovery in Jefferson County, and they just sort of sat around a table and said, what can we do to start saving some lives? How can we help here? And the result was this central location, increasing access to treatment, increasing distribution of naloxone, and the RRC was born. And because the Crisis Center had been doing this work, Dr. Wilson knew Meg McLamory, who's the executive director. He approached her because really that's what happens. If you're in a bad spot and you call the Crisis Center, a trained volunteer is going to answer the phone, and they're going to make sure that you're safe. They're going to talk to you, and they're going to connect you to whatever resources you might need. So the same sort of thinking was applied to substance use.
Yeah, which is really probably about the first time that happened around in Central Alabama, as far as I know.
Yeah, so at the time there was another peer-run organization, Ross. Ross is one of our partner agencies. Right. We couldn't help the amount of people we help today. We couldn't do it without Ross and a lot of other partners, a lot of other agencies out there. But what made us different was a clinical component. Yep. So in the state of Alabama, if you have health insurance, I'm not going to say it's easy, but there's some really good resources out there, and the system is a little less difficult to navigate.
It's a little easier.
Yeah, and the chances are, if you need to go somewhere, if you need residential treatment, chances are you're going to be able to find a bed. In the state of Alabama, with the state certified system, it's great treatment, but the problem is there's a wait list a lot of times to actually get into a program, and you can't even access that system of care until you have the state assessment. It's the ADMH placement assessment based on the ASAM criteria, and nothing begins until you have that. So the answer, we saw it, was perform those assessments at no cost to the client, walk in same day, don't make people wait on the assessment, and let's at least get the process started. So in addition to peers that work at the RRC, we have a team of assessment specialists, and they're certified clinicians, either social workers or counselors, and so we're able to offer both the peer services and the clinical services as well.
One thing I wanted to go back and give you a chance to kind of elaborate on, you mentioned the purpose that you discovered kind of early in recovery. Actually, I've kind of got two questions. So the first question is do you feel like that moment was kind of the first turning point for you in your recovery? Because I know anybody in recovery probably can relate to that feeling where you're just kind of, at first, you're just kind of holding on to your seat and you're like, something's got to give, I don't know, and then all of a sudden something happens. Somebody says something, you see something, you hear something, and your perspective starts to change. Was that kind of when that started for you?
Yeah, I think that was a critical moment for me. That was the first time I started to entertain the idea that maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I've had a lot of starts and stops with this. I would love to say that having a recurrence of use wasn't part of my story, because it doesn't have to be a part of anyone's story. But it was a part of mine, and I know it's a part of a lot of people's. So I had some exposure to 12-step fellowships. I had some exposure to clinical treatment before this last time, but each time I never looked at it as, I was never present for it. I was always looking a little further down the road. I was always thinking either at some point I'll put myself in a position to be able to successfully use and drink again. I was sort of like, okay, I'm doing this to make the consequences stop. I never looked at it as okay, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing today. And I think that's one thing that sober living or this recovery residence allowed me to do, was really start to latch onto that idea of one day at a time. And this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. I can't talk enough about the importance of doing something right after treatment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to treatment twice. I went to the same place twice, and I tell people all the time, nothing changed. It was the exact treatment model. They were some of the exact counselors. Nothing changed. What changed was me and my willingness to kind of do everything they were telling me to do when I left. And that looked like going to this place and just sort of saying, okay, recovery is what I'm going to do right now, and I'm not going to focus on a year down the road. Or I hope that answered the question.
It does. I have a very similar experience. And the second part of the question is, it might seem obvious for most of us, the connection between that awakening of a new purpose for you and what you do now in your job. But can you kind of elaborate on that and elaborate on how it might feed into your recovery? Because I know from my own experience, and Art probably does too, that, there is a line between your profession and your recovery, but that sometimes they just bleed into each other, and that's fine, because for me, for example, like when I worked at the treatment center, I had to learn that there was a difference between my 12-step work and me working there and the work I did there. There was a big difference. But anyways, like, kind of tell us about how that your job and your recovery kind of work together.
Yeah, so I guess I had been at this place for about 3 months when the opportunity to work there came up. And so I was what they call a resident manager. I was living on site, but I was, for the most part, working 40 hours a week, and I was staff. So even then, people started talking to me, and all I can say is I was in a position, and this goes back to me being present and not thinking, I was in a position to hear what they were telling me at the time, and it was, hey, look, like, you have to have your own recovery outside of this place. Your job can't be your recovery. And so I latched onto that, but like you said, it's impossible when we're working in this, and I hate calling it a business, when we're working in this field, it's impossible not to have your personal recovery kind of blend into your professional life. I guess it was really when, because I went to work a little later down the road for that treatment, for the same treatment center that I went through, and that really exposed me to kind of one particular type of recovery, right? And then when I heard about the Recovery Resource Center, and I decided I wanted to sort of dip my toe back into the nonprofit world. In a former life, I worked for a large nonprofit when I lived in New York. But that's when I really started sort of looking at this idea of many paths to recovery. I started noticing that my own path didn't necessarily equal the only way of success for really the majority of people out there. So that aspect of it, I'm able to kind of separate, okay, this is my recovery and this is what works for me. But then every day I'm going to work for an organization that really the main goal is just to help people identify what's best for them, connect them to different agencies, different partners, collaborate. It's really this kind of, it's a different type of kind of all-encompassing recovery, so I can separate it like that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I know for a fact today that working in this field is one way I will never, ever forget where I've come from.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I was working, I don't know, if I was a car salesman, I could go to work during the day and I could make it 8 hours, really, possibly without thinking about recovery. And then it would be on me to go home and either go to a meeting or maybe pick up the big book or another book or, but with what I do every day, like I'm seeing people in the middle of their disease, and it's impossible for me to forget how bad it is out there and from where I've come.
Wow. So one question that is we're having the conversation that's occurring to me is, first, before we get through it today, I'd love for you to just kind of lay out all of the precise things you can do for folks at Recovery Resource Center.
Okay.
Get to that in just a minute. I'd like you to kind of lay out in some clarity. These are some things people can expect from us and can get from us, okay?
Sure.
The other thought would be the collaboration that you mentioned earlier in terms of how crisis centers developed all these different programs over the years, and then Recovery Resource Center is just one of them, okay? So how have you seen in your own recovery or in your work with the Resource Center, how have you seen the state of Alabama or Jefferson County or just where we are starting to pull together more to collaborate rather than to compete with each other to help people?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I believe in wraparound services, right? So if there's a person out there and they need help with multiple things, there's not going to be one agency that can provide help for all of those things. It's going to require a lot of organizations working together to really wrap that person up in care. When I was in New York, the nonprofit I worked for up there had started out as a very small nonprofit, but then it grew and it grew and it grew to a very large nonprofit with a very lofty mission. The mission was to end homelessness in New York City. So one agency can't do that. So that was really, as a development associate, I sort of saw what it was like for multiple agencies, multiple organizations to come together to constantly communicate, to establish relationships, and really with one goal, and that was to help someone and to help them efficiently, and to really make sure that all of their needs were met. The Crisis Center, their mission is to empower people in their greatest time of need, right? So it's identifying an unmet need for someone who's in crisis, and most of the time there's more than one.
Yeah.
So that means there's going to be more than one agency involved. Jefferson County, I think, is in a really good position right now. The state of Alabama is in a really good position right now. There's a lot of organizations out there. They're coming together and they're talking about ways to not operate in silos. They're talking about ways to help one another and ways to build on each other's strengths. The RRC is a collaborative initiative. So we know that we're out there not just to help the client, but to help all the other providers do a better job of helping their clients.
Great, yeah.
So, I mean, the Addiction Prevention Coalition, you guys have been a model for a long time, really, here in Birmingham, of bringing a lot of different organizations to the table, whether it be the End Addiction Walk or some of the other initiatives you have where it's like, hey, like, we're a community. You hear all the time that the opposite of addiction is connection, right? So having organizations like the APC out there fostering connections, it's really important.
So tell the folks that are watching this that may not be aware of RRC or maybe are aware but don't really know what you do. Thumbnail every one of the services that you guys can offer, whether it's to someone who's struggling with substance use disorder and is ready to get help, or maybe even their family members.
Yeah, so we like to think that that we do one thing and we do it very well, and that's connect people to treatment. However, treatment doesn't have to be the end all be all. we spend a lot of time just educating people about resources. It's in our name. So we're there to be able to answer questions and talk about recovery, talk about different types of treatment. But primarily what we do, try to increase access, get that assessment completed. So if someone comes to the RRC, they're going to work with a peer, so a certified recovery support specialist. And that's just important from a sense of really radical empathy.
Because they've been through it themselves.
Yeah. It's important to be able to feel like you're talking to someone who's been where you're at from the jump.
Yeah.
A lot of times I think about like, what would my story be like if when I got sent to intensive outpatient when I was 21 years old, when I was court ordered to this treatment program. What if the very first person I ever talked to was someone who said, "Hey, man, I've been through this program before. Like, let me tell you, like, I know what you're thinking. I know, I think it could have been different." So you start by connecting with the peer, and then we're going to get that assessment done, and we're going to send that assessment to multiple providers. So that's what we hang our hat on. Is we're unbiased. We're a third party. We're not treatment.
Yeah.
So we're not concerned about getting someone into a specific program to fill a bed.
Yeah.
We're concerned about trying to get someone help and trying to get them help quickly.
Yeah.
So if you come to us and what you end up needing is a residential program, and we go back to what I said about the wait lists. Unfortunately, there's going to be a wait really wherever you go right now, and we're able to send that one assessment to 3 or 4 different providers. That way you get on 3 or 4 wait lists, and as soon as a bed opens up, and while you're waiting, you have that peer component.
That's what I was about to confirm. That's what I thought.
Yeah. So you're saying that while a person is waiting for whatever level of treatment they're going to go to, that your peer support specialists are maintaining some contact with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we all know like motivation is a fickle mistress, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a fickle thing. And one day I was very motivated. And then the next day I started to come up with another plan. Yeah. And maybe I have this play over here, or maybe this will work. Our peers are there to sort of establish contact every single day. And also going back to the transportation, going back to other barriers. I mean, there's some ins and outs in the system, right? Like some providers, some residential programs are going to require you to have 30 days medication when you show up. Sometimes people don't know that, or the provider tells them that, but they forget. Like, so it's our peers' job to make sure they have everything they need for when that bed opens up. Yeah. They have the best chance to actually get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to know how that motivation piece, I'm sure some of the peers there are really good at it. I always just assumed once that window closed, it was gone. You know, as soon as that, if I had to guess, it's like an average of like 24 hours really. And then if they still haven't gotten into treatment, it's just, you got to wait until it comes back.
Yeah, I think one thing we do is at intake, we're going to help the person establish some short-term recovery goals.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times what you're going to hear is, I just want to be a good father, or I want to get my daughter back, or I need to get this job so I can move out of and so.
Which are good goals, but are too vague.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So we're going to really kind of get that person to think a little more about those goals, and we're going to remind them of those goals.
And what can I do today?
Yeah. During that waiting period. I mean, for me, the motivation, I feel like, so for me at the very end, what sort of got me to where I'm at today was working with this one counselor. And I had worked with her for a very long time. And she was patient. And she used to always ask me this question, John, do you think you're going to harm yourself or anyone else? Right? A lot of us are familiar with that question, and it was always no, no, no. And one day she just rephrased it. And she said, do you ever go to bed at night and wish that you wouldn't wake up the next morning? And for whatever reason, it clicked with me that day. And I said, yeah, I've been doing that every night for the last year, basically. And so that opened the door for me to get some help with my mental health first, like primary right then and there. And the substance use treatment followed. But that wasn't enough, ultimately. I went to treatment, I left treatment, and I wish maybe I just didn't have the power to remember how bad that moment was. So being able to remind someone of those emotions that when someone comes in to the Recovery Resource Center, a lot of times I tell them, this is the hardest thing you might ever have to do. Mm-hmm. Just coming in, like telling us your story, asking for help, like the courage, like, and so.
But it could be the last time you have to do it.
Yeah.
That's something I've always told people in that situation. Like, it's going to be probably the hardest thing you've ever done, but it could be the only time you have to do it for the rest of your life, you know?
And so I consider it a privilege to be that person that someone is sharing with. And so if they're willing to share with us in that moment some of that shame and guilt, then maybe 2 weeks later when they're still waiting on a bed and they're having a really good day and they might have that new idea, then maybe we can remind them, like, hey, remember, because I wish somebody had reminded me of just how bad it was, just how bad the internal conflict had gotten.
It is that kind of stuff. It is inspiring and motivating. It never gets old, really. Art, did you have any?
Well, I was just thinking
questions?
what you brought up just a moment ago in your personal story, and thanks for sharing that, is often we're unaware, even if we're trying to help, right? Even if we know there are many pathways, sometimes we forget that there are these underlying mental health issues that haven't been uncovered yet, right? And are clouded and disguised even by the use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're finally catching up to that medically, scientifically, from treatment, however you want to look at it, theologically, philosophically, however you want to look at it. We're beginning to become wiser about all the layers that might be involved and beginning to ask the right questions more often, right? Yeah. There could be a mental health issue that has been undiscovered or has been clouded, and we need to be really diligent about looking for those things. And as you said, then finding the right resource for that, and not just assuming that this is all about substance use, right?
Yeah, I think we're moving in a good direction, at least the people I talk to, because it seems like for a while, and I was guilty of this, I was guilty of trying to figure out which came first, right? Yeah. I was guilty of trying to figure out which exacerbated the other and trying to identify, like, what's the most important. And there's a really big movement now for just treating the person and treating both of them at the same time. And there's really there's no point until you're able to, because what I know is there were a lot of times where, whether it was through medication or, like I mentioned, a counselor who was really good at her job, but sometimes those things don't stand a chance if I'm out there using every day. And so I do believe that, like, if you're able to stop one, if you're able to stop the using, then it becomes a little more manageable to actually identify some of those root causes.
So before Edward closes us, last thing, how would people either that need your services or want to contribute, right? Because you're under the umbrella of United Way, right? Yeah. Crisis Center and Recovery Resource Center. How the people that need your services, want to know more about it, or want to contribute or connect you to other resources, how would they find you?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way is the website, www.crisiscenterbham, that's BHAM.org. The website that'll really allow them to see all the work that the Crisis Center is doing. It'll allow them to see how we're a United Way of Central Alabama agency. So, or just pick up the phone and call us. I mean, that's the easiest way to get connected to us is 205-458-3377.
Okay. Well, thanks, Edward. Thank you, John. Thanks so much. This has been a delight. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for what you guys are doing, helping so many people. Folks, join us next time as we come back together for APC Recovery Cafe.
One of the things that APC is known for is being a connector because we're stronger together.
Not only are we there for those who are suffering through substance use disorder, but we're there for family members, and we really take our job seriously.
We all have personal reason why we're in this field. We're changing people's lives one community at a time.